So, have you tried to get on Qualtrics again? You should be able to now, yes?
Yes.
Okay, if you can get that done tonight, that would be great. You do get points for it. The reason is I would like to be able to get the data and then put it in a form that I can present it back to you. The other thing we did is that we did the recall in class. I want you to feel like what it feels like when you walk in and a patient gets handed and asked to fill out, tell me what you took and you ate in the last 24 hours. We are going to go over what you will do with your diary. So the next assignment, and I'll give you the sheets out at the end of the hour, is that you will keep a 24-hour diary. You can select any time you want. It needs to be a 24-hour period, as long as you get it done by the due date. You will also then take that and you will analyze your diet. And a lot of what we're going to go over today is that analysis. So the grade sheet, your dietary assessment is 15 points just for finishing the survey. The recall is 15 points. The diary will be 30. Your assessment will be 40. And that is the most important, or one of the heaviest pieces. So it weights about 15% of your final grade. Okay. So handouts for today. You've got those, right? Do we get those too? Everybody got a handout for today? Basic skills? Okay, great. Okay, so some of the things we're going to look at today is we're going to look at food labels. How many of you feel very comfortable looking at a food label to figure out your food? Okay, that's good. We're also going to look at whole grain stamps. Do you know where to look for those and what those mean? Okay, so we're going to look at those. We're going to look at the changes that are coming up in labels. Labels are going to change as of next year. I've started to see some changes already show up. But what's on those, I'm also going to look at it from the standpoint of teaching a patient. We'll look at what organic means and what those stamps mean. We'll look at natural. We're also going to look at what GMO is. We're going to learn how to calculate an ideal body weight. You will need to do that on your evaluation, and also a BMI. You do not have to put your BMI on your form, but I mean you can if you want. But I have a note there that says that you check mark off that you did that, but you don't have to put that down for me to see. The other is we'll look at interpreting BMIs, the pros and cons of using them. And then we're also going to look at how to calculate your resting metabolic rate, which you will do, and look at the effects of activity on your caloric intake, and then the thermic value of food. So that's what we're going to cover today. And then you will do a lot of that assessment on your sheet. And there's some things we'll look at tomorrow. You've already done vitamin D and calcium in the osteoporosis lecture. I'll go back over that tomorrow. You will calculate those. Some of it we'll get tomorrow too. So the things that you will look at on your assessment will be your total caloric intake, your fat intake, the percent of calories from that, carbs, percent of calories from carbs, your fiber intake, your protein intake, your cholesterol, sodium, calcium. That's why you need to be able to read the labels and interpret them, how many whole grains you're eating as well. Okay. All right. So I didn't cover this. The multiple choice exam will be next Monday. I've set it aside for 10 to noon. If we find out, I'll tell you when we get closer how many questions that'll be. If we can shorten that and come later, then that's fine with me as well. We just need to be done by noon. So that's 70% of your grade. The dietary assessment is 15%, and the presentation is 15%. Any questions on that? Those are weighted, so each of those assessments grade out at 100% or at 100 points, but they will be weighted to 15% of the grade. Just makes it easier to grade when you use that. Okay, so we do that. And the reason I gave the dietary, the recall back is that I will have you compare the two. So you compare what were you able to recall, and then what do you find when you document it, okay? So in your documentation, you're going to put down everything that goes in your mouth, okay? The amount, if you have to measure it, that's fine with me. That's what we would do with the patient. We would ask them, write down what you've eaten. How did you prepare it? What amount did you use? Now, we would go back and then assign the calories most likely, but I want you to go through that process as well. Okay. Oops. Okay, so food labels have been required for about 20 years. They were intended that patients could start to, or people could use them to compare products. And we do that a lot. It's made it easier to kind of understand the caloric content of a product. But we often will tell, or I will instruct patients, is look for you may have like Raisin Bran. There's about 5 different brands of Raisin Bran. If you look at them, they vary a lot. They vary based on calories per serving. They vary in the amount of added sugar. They vary in the amount of fiber added. So I'll often tell people, compare. If someone has told you you need lower sodium, or you're wanting to reduce the amount of added sugar to your diet, look at the label. The new labels are going to actually tell you how much sugar they added to the product, which we don't have right now. Okay. Let's see. Everything is required to have a food label on it, except some things that you might get in a deli, or if you go into a mom and pop restaurant, they're not required. But now restaurants and chains are required to do that. You may notice if you go to McDonald's, if you've got a chain of 20 or more stores, you're required as of this year to put the product or the caloric intake up there. Panera's does it. This is McDonald's. Where else do I see? Starbucks has them. Okay. Now, for me, it makes a big difference when I look at that, and I'll steer clear of foods. I don't know, in taking care of patients, that I really do feel that people understand calories or calorie needs. I don't get any sense that people have an idea of how many calories they should take in. I was talking to a patient one time about, you got to lower your caloric intake. They wanted to do a transplant, but they told him you got to lose 20 pounds before they do a transplant. And after a while he said, I just need to stop you because I don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about calories. I just assumed everybody knew what calories were, but they don't. And I don't think people know how many calories they need. So I want you to know how many calories you should have in a day, so you could also help a patient if you don't have a dietitian. So let's look at the ability to compare labels with this one. These are 2 soups, A and B, and if you look at them, same serving size, and about the same calories. One is 150, one is 160. But if you look at the sodium content, they vary a lot. Soup A has 250, soup B has over a gram. They vary in fat content. The soup A is 2.5, soup B is 11 grams. They're about the same in saturated fat, so they vary probably mostly in polyunsaturated, saturated and monounsaturated fats, probably mostly poly. Cholesterol is about the same. Their carb content is quite a bit different. So your lower fat soup has quite a bit more carbohydrate. That would make sense in terms of calories being the same. And then the carbohydrate content of the high fat soup, much lower. Protein content is 6 grams for A and 1 gram for B. Vitamins are similar, I think. No, about 10% more iron. And then minerals, some difference. So this is the way patients that are more savvy and have been taught can compare products and choose one that's better for them. Especially if they've been told to choose a low sodium product. Or I need you to lower the fat content in your diet. You're wanting to diet, so maybe you do that. Or with a diabetic, they may want to avoid the more higher carb soup. I'm going to encourage you is to, when you're in the grocery store, pick up products that are similar to what you usually buy and just look at how they differ. So that you can start to get kind of attuned to the differences in products that maybe look the same. Or look at a generic. Look at a generic Cheerios versus regular Cheerios. Look at Honey Nut versus regular. Because if a patient tells you they eat Cheerios, well now there's about 10 different types. And Honey Nut is different. And now what's the newest one? Cheerio clusters. Well, it's 160 calories per 3/4 cup. Cheerios itself is 100 calories per cup. So there's a difference. If you switch, then you're getting more calories. So this is the current food label. It is standardized. It has to look like this. It has to be in this format. So the first thing is the serving size. I think most people just blow right past that. Your patients do. But it's good if they're really having trouble, is to point out that bag of potato chips that you buy is 5 servings, not 1. Okay? Or if you're going to eat the whole bag, realize that you have to multiply everything times 5. I can tell you that math in Oklahoma is not very good. Most people cannot do it. We give numeracy tests in our diabetes clinic, and we find that the majority of patients cannot do fractions. They can't determine percentages. They can add pretty well, subtract. Multiplying it above, you start to have people who can't do that. The next is servings per container. So that's one thing to help people realize that whatever it comes as is multiple. Those are very arbitrary. The government sets the serving size. They kind of do it based on comparable intake with other products. So it doesn't mean it's necessarily healthy or right for you. It's just an arbitrary setting as here's what a serving size of this food is. The next is calories. That is in a serving. Okay, so you can see where you start to get away from people that have good reading skills, that the labels I think are still pretty bad. Now they made some improvements on the ones that are coming out next year, but to me they're still somewhat complicated. And then this year, or in the current ones, they do calories from fat, because we've been on a low-fat kick in this country for the last 20 to 25 years. So wanting people to know what percent it was important when they started these. The next is total fat. Again, everything was geared towards lowering fat intake. So it tells you the total fat, and then they have to tell you how much saturated fat. It will always come next. Then they also have to put trans fats on there. 0 does not mean it's free of trans fats. If it's below a certain level, then they can put 0 on there, but it doesn't mean that it is 0, but it has a very low amount. They might put on polyunsaturated fats. They might put monounsaturated fats. You can guess by most foods that they are probably, if there's a big difference between the total fat and the saturated fat, most of it's coming in polyunsaturated. There's a few foods that are high in monounsaturated. We'll go over those tomorrow. Cholesterol, they have to tell you. Sodium, they have to tell you. Some will also tell you potassium. If not, they usually will put it down. Sometimes you'll find it at the very bottom of the label, but it's not required. Total carbohydrate is all the things that would make up a carbohydrate. That's the important part, because that's what gets converted to sugar for people with diabetes. They always have to tell you fiber, and they have to tell you sugars. But that's the sugars in the product. It doesn't tell you added sugars. And it won't add up. So you see 5 is accounted for, and you got 37 grams of carbs in there. And then it tells you protein. Over on the side, you see percent of daily value. If you look on page 2, these are the reference values. So those percent values are referenced to a 2,000 calorie diet. And if you look at the second table down there, it tells you how they've calculated that. So fat is calculated at 30% of your total caloric intake from fat, 65 grams a day. Then they're telling you what percent it is. I can tell you in teaching patients, percent daily value has absolutely no value. I can give you some guides that tell you what's low and what's high, but to me they are just, I don't know who came up with that, but it was maybe for the elite who think and study nutrition, but it has no help. I don't even pay attention to it when I'm looking at calories, and I count calories a lot. So the other is saturated fat is about 10, our goal is 10% of daily calorie intake. Cholesterol, 300, doesn't matter how much calories you take in. Sodium, the same. Potassium, the same. So those are the goals for somebody who eats a 2,000 calorie diet about. Carbs, 60% from calories. That might make the low carb people quake in their boots, I don't know. 25 grams of fiber, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, but we look at fiber intake based on the amount of calories you take in, so that's what that calculation is, 11.5 per thousand is what's recommended. And then protein, 50 grams a day, okay? So that's the current. Lots of good. I think it's very helpful to have people understand a label and be able to read it. Okay. Questions about that? Whole grain content. So the more grains you eat, the healthier you're supposed to be. The lower overall mortality, less heart disease with whole grains. So several years ago they developed this stamp. And if you look go home and look at your food products. Several years ago I could find the stamp, but I found that more modifying, like I was looking at my Cheerios box today in the oatmeal, and the Cheerios just states it on there, but they don't carry the stamp. But I know they're 100% whole grain. Oatmeal does the same thing. They don't necessarily have this stamp, but they will make a statement about that.
Well, what I learned, because I do a lot of label reading with the schools, is that if it lists like the whole grain product #1 on the ingredients, then they don't have to.
They don't have to do it. Well, that's it. Then oatmeal is 100% whole grain. So you'll see the stamps look different. So if it's 100% whole grain, that is defined as 16 or more grams of whole grain per serving. So they can carry that stamp. The other one, they have to have at least 8 grams of whole grain in it to get that stamp that's on the right-hand side. And there you see they put the amount per serving. Okay. So in your evaluation of your diet, I want you to look at those. Look at your bread, your cereals, your crackers. Triscuits is a very good source of whole grains. So that's another thing you'll be evaluating. So do then, as Laura says, if you suspect it's a high percentage, then look at the list. But they also, on the oatmeal and the Cheerios, they state it somewhere else on the box. They just don't use that stamp. Okay. On page 4, over there to the side, I gave you an evaluation, or I gave you a guideline for the daily value. If it's 5% or less, it would be considered low. If it's 20% or more, it would be considered high, if you wanted somebody to be able to use those percentages. Okay, page 5. Here's the new label that'll start showing up next year. So you can see that they've made it larger type. They have, at the top, again, they state the serving size, but they've made it bigger. So I think that draws the attention better. They took out the amount of calories from fat and just increased that calorie size. Total fat, cholesterol, sodium, total carb, all of that is the same until you get down to total sugars, and they tell you how many added sugars, which I think is really good. Very helpful, especially on a diabetes standpoint, or I think for obesity or weight training, that would be really good. You'll see under the Minerals and vitamins, they have changed those. So they have added vitamin D, they've kept calcium and iron, and they put potassium down there. Okay. So they dropped vitamin A out. Questions about those?
Is there a reason why they changed the vitamin?
I think because vitamin A, you have to take a lot in order to overdose. You need to know your vitamin D, so there's much more data behind vitamin D and its health benefits, is one of the reasons I think. Potassium also, huge benefits, and it wasn't required even though some people put them in.
And the added sugars, is that just artificial sugars that they add? or-
Refined sugar, sugar, like out of your pantry.
Oh, okay.
Grocery stores, you'll notice like Walmart's really good. They have on all their fruits and vegetables, they have serving size and what the calorie count is and what they are high in. That is something they don't have to do. If you go to Sprouts, they don't do that, or other grocery stores. So that's one of the other places where food is present, but they don't necessarily have to give you information or data. Okay. On page 6, I put, we're going to look at nutrient content claims. This is really confusing to patients. So I think it's good for you to know what these terms are. They are all defined, and they mean something with the label they're associated with. So patients will come in and tell me, here's what I ate for breakfast. They're eating a lot of jelly, and then go, but it's sugar-free. It's like, it's not sugar-free. You can't have fruit involved in a product and be sugar-free. You can't. But it means they probably didn't add any sugar in the process. So it's really confusing to patients. So let's look at what free means. So here's Eddie's fat-free ice cream. If you look at the free synonyms, other things they could use would be zero fat, zero sugar, no fat, without fat, trivial source of, negligible source of, insignificant dietary source of. Any of those terms they can put on a package mean the same as free. So let's look at that. So calorie-free has less than 5 calories per label. Fat-free is less than half a gram per serving. Cholesterol-free, less than 2 milligrams, that's nothing. Sodium-free, less than 5 milligrams, that's nothing. Sugar-free, less than half a gram per labeled serving. So let's look at this one. Its total saturated, or total fat is 0%, so that's how they can call it free. Let's look at low. So on this one, I want you to put a star by sugar-free. That one I want you to know for test purpose. Let's look at low. So synonyms with low are little, few, low source of, contains a small amount of. These are foods that can be eaten frequently without exceeding dietary guidelines on one or more of the components. See how confusing it gets? They make it so precise, but for the person in the street, it's difficult for them to, I think, to comprehend or count all that in. So this one says low. Let's see, where is it? It's probably low sodium. Yeah, low sodium soup. Okay. So for sodium, for fat, sodium, cholesterol, and calories, there is a definition. Put a star by low sodium. I want you to know that one. So low fat means less than 3 grams or less per serving. Low sodium is 140 milligrams or less per serving. So that's how that soup fits it. If you look at their nutrition facts, that's where they have met the criteria. Very low is 35 or less. Low cholesterol, 20 milligrams or less, or 2 grams or less of saturated fat per serving. Low calorie, 40 calories or less per serving. Okay. What's reduced mean? So reduced means that they have nutritionally altered the product to be 25% less with some component compared to a reference product. So if you compare this to Peter Pan or Jif, the total fat would be 16 grams. So for them to call it reduced, it's 12 grams. What they've done though is they've upped the number of total carbs, because the calorie count in this and Peter Pan and Jif are about the same. I don't know why anybody would eat a reduced peanut butter. I just don't. All the fat comes from monounsaturated. It's good fat. And if you go reduced, you get more carbs. I think in a Peter Pan it's about 3 grams of carb, 3 to 6. That's my opinion. You can eat reduced if you want, but you're just exchanging one thing for the other. I guess it's whichever you want. Okay, so that's reduced. This is less. Sorry, man, that was tiny. Maybe your screen is better. Okay, so less means the food contains 25% less nutrients or calories than a reference food. So since this is baked Ruffles, it's probably compared to the regular Ruffles. I bet you it's in calories. 120 calories per, that's about right, because a regular is 160. It's probably in fat. Okay. Look, go down, if you want to learn about light and less, look at the potato chip lane. So these read light, so the sodium's been reduced 50% of the reference food. So it's usually referring to just one item. So everything else is either the same or it's been upped or changed. High contains 20% or more value of the particular nutrient. So high fiber oatmeal is usually about 10 grams, regular oatmeal, same amounts, about 3 to 4 grams of fiber. So it's good, 20% or more difference. Here's more. I'm really, I'm laughing because, but it's a more relative term. So fortified, enriched, which you see here, added, extra, plus. This one is enriched with A, D, and E, and calcium. So it has to be at least 10% above. Look at these in the grocery store when you go through. Yes?
For reduced and less, both say food contains 25% or less, so what's the difference?
I can't tell you. I don't know. But they can use both of those terms. They both have definitions with regards to food claims, so I'm not sure. Laura, do you have any?
With the reduced, what's nutritionally altered? Yeah. Because they're both into a regular or reference product.
Yeah. And if they meet low, then they have to claim it as low. So. Okay, questions about those? Okay, lean and extra lean. So these refer to meat and poultry. Okay. On lean and extra lean, I want you to know the fat content. So this one says extra lean. So if you look at lean, it's less than 10 grams of fat per serving. Look at your, go and look at your hamburger meat. You'll have, most hamburger meat, like ground chuck, is about 80%. Then if you'll get to less, then you'll get up to like an 85, and 93 is usually the highest, which is usually ground sirloin. And that's usually your extra lean is about 93% fat-free, so it's about 7% fat. So know that lean less than 5 and extra lean less than 10 and extra lean less than 5. Just start looking at foods as you fix them during the day. Okay, what does organic mean? To me, organic means that it's carbon-based. Sorry that they took that word and made it something else. So these are the seals. You can be 100% organic, all carbon. You can be 95, I hate it. 95% of it, or you can be USDA organic, or you can be made with organic ingredients. So there's 3 criteria in order to get the stamp. So if you look down, or at the very top, so organic means that 95%, to get that top one, 95% or more is certified organic. So they're free of additives, pesticides haven't been used, chemicals haven't been used. The way they're processed, they avoid certain industrial solvents. For the remainder of the other 5%, they have to be on an approved list. So they have to meet up fairly high criteria. 100% means all of them meet that guideline. Made with organic means that 70% or more meets that criteria, and the other 30% have to be on the approved list. I know of nothing that shows a difference in outcome. Now, I'm not saying it is good or bad, but to spend the extra money, you have to decide whether or not it's worth to you.
So does the 95% mean that like they're not on the approved list, but they do all the other stuff?
No, 95% means that's the highest, they meet all of it.
So, okay.
And then the others that aren't accounted for are on a list.
So then the people that are on the list get the 100% stamp of approval?
No, it's not the people, it's the way it's been made or processed.
Okay.
So you're looking for 95 if you want to go or all organic?
That's the way I read it.
Okay.
The organic seal means that they meet that 95% organic, and the other 5% are on the list, approved list. I pulled up that list before. It's just, it's not stuff I understand, but it's mostly solvents and things that they use.
How long has the organic label been around?
Oh, probably longer than I would tell you. I would think 10 to 15 years.
Okay.
Lauren, I don't know. It's really gained momentum. You just saw it, real small little sections, but
I was
maybe
just
15 to
curious
20.
because you said there's no health outcomes between it, and I was wondering if maybe just because it hasn't been around that often that they've been doing
Who's
that.
going to pay for it?
Right.
Who's going to get people to buy all organic and look at them? Because you have to follow, things out for long periods of time. So,
It's just people's fear of getting
I think
cancer or
so.
something.
yes, I think it's in response to that. Maybe in response to other things that have come up, like hormones in beef cattle, and the worry about, some people link that to early maturity in females now. So probably it's all wrapped in that. I didn't go back and look at the history of the movement. Natural also has a meaning, a definition. So you'll see this on, I think it's meat and poultry. So it cannot have, and if you look up there, it cannot have artificial flavoring or coloring ingredients or chemical preservative or anything artificial or synthetic, and it must be no more than minimally processed. And you have to put on the label, which they have done, why it meets that criteria. So it says fresh, never frozen. Tells you the solution of water, salt, spices to enhance tenderness and juiciness, no artificial ingredients, minimally processed. And I'm not quite sure what minimally processed actually means. I don't know. Questions or comments about those? Okay, GMO. So if you know about GMO, what do you think?
If we don't want to starve, we should probably get over it.
Okay, so a lot of our food is genetically modified because we can develop resistant products. I've given you a list there. There's the first one is tomatoes. Tomatoes are more resistant to frost. What others did I give you? Potatoes that don't bruise, apples that don't brown, pigs that glow in the dark. I have no idea, but they do. 90% of our soy, cotton, canola, corn, and sugar beets sold in the United States are genetically engineered. So we're mostly manipulating the genes to produce a better product. But that has a lot of people up in arms. I've had patients just absolutely argued to the death with me about GMOs and what it does to the environment, what it does to them. You don't know what people are doing to our food source. 3 groups have come out, the World Health Organization, the AMA, and the National Academy of Sciences, that says it's no riskier than consuming foods that have been developed by other methods. Anybody have a strong feeling against them?
When I studied abroad, it was about sustainability in Costa Rica, and they're super, like they're battling this right now because all of their local farms are, like, they're getting like beat out by these GMO farms. So it's like, it's really controversial.
So that's economics,
Yeah.
not so much the safety of the
Well,
food
no,
supply.
because the people who, like, their claim is that people who work at the GMO, got really sick and they die early there. So
Really?
that's kind of what they're holding on to, why they need to get rid of those GMO farms, is because of the health that
Mm.
kind of, I guess, causes from working at the farms itself.
I wonder if that's in the development labs or out in the field.
I think it's the fields from what I
Really?
understood.
As far as the cotton and canola and things like that, even wheat, those products, those are genetically modified so that they're drought resistant.
Right.
And so I feel like people don't understand that that's why they're GMO. It's not because we've
Doesn't
altered
enhance their
it some
nutrition.
crazy way to make it grow bigger and whatever, but,
Right.
I mean, almost all the wheat that we plant is, and cotton.
And almost all of the foods, it's usually due to preserve length of life of the food. It's not to enhance its nutrition, it's mostly to keep it around longer.
Which I think plays into the economic role, like she was saying, that now you have companies producing a lower cost product at higher demand and more of it, so they're just winning that out because they can make more food for less money. And that goes to the same thing, people want perfectly healthy, perfect organic, homegrown, whatever, but then they want it to be cheap and they don't want to do it themselves, so it's like a whole cycle of how do you get all the things.
So if a food is not genetically modified, they can put a stamp on their product. So I was looking at my lunch food and some of like the drink, I don't even know how to pronounce the drink I like, but it, how do you say it, kombucha? Oh, love those. Dr. Britton came in last night and he goes, you drink the weirdest stuff. But I love it. And I found the coolest one I've had is in a blue bottle. And then it's got a neck and it's got bees all around it. I saved it. I know he'll throw it out if he gets a chance. It was really good. It was blueberry and honey and then the green and black teas. I love them. So anyway, but on it said no GMO. I'm like, good. So I'm okay with GMO if it increases the food supply and keeps food around longer for people to eat. I don't have any strong opinions against it, but that's my personal opinion. Okay, next are things that you need to be able to do. One is to determine your ideal body weight. Probably this first one most people use on the bottom of page 8. So using just a pounds per height is for females, it's 100 pounds for 5 feet, and then you add 5 pounds for each inch above that. Okay. So if you're 5'6", you would, for a female, an ideal body weight would be 130 pounds. For a male, 106 pounds for the first 5 feet, and then add 6 pounds for each above. So that's a really easy way, it's easy to remember to calculate that. There are other much more complex equations that can be used, but that's an easy one. Percent ideal body weight is just the actual body weight divided by the ideal body weight. So you'll see in a lot of, like for kids, when you look at hypertension and you look at what a blood pressure should be, they'll look at a lot of percent of ideal body weight. Don't do it as much with adults, but you'll see it with children's charts. Adjusted body weight, sometimes we use that. I'll use an adjusted body weight if a patient weighs a whole lot more then the equation is a calling force. Like with creatinine clearance, if I've got somebody who's really obese, because I know they tend to put on more muscle mass, I'll use an adjusted body weight. So it's the actual body weight minus ideal times 25% plus their ideal body weight. So those are those terminology. BMI, everybody know how to calculate a BMI or look it up on, there's calculators, I've given you one that's here. They're all over the internet. I've given you also a chart so that you can look it up. So calculate your own BMI. So BMI, it looks at height and weight. And then it is broken down into categories. So I want you to know those categories. There's lots of controversy about BMI because it doesn't take into account individual differences. It groups people into big classes. And a BMI 1 is usually about 5 to 6 pounds. Okay? So what they've done is they've looked at large numbers of people and they have looked at what happens to them in the end. That's how you get that people who have a BMI of 18 to 24 live longer because they think, well, it's due to the fact that they don't weigh as much. Or obesity, 30 and above, those folks tend to get sicker sooner, die earlier. So that's where you start to see some of those, that data being used based on body weight. But it doesn't take into account the differences in male and female. So the BMI chart is the same for males and females. So it doesn't take into account that women tend to have more body fat than men do. It doesn't take into account an athlete who may have a large amount of muscle mass and a very low percent of body fat. So it doesn't tell you that much, but in people who are not athletes, usually a higher BMI means a higher body fat. So it's not the be-all, end-all, but it is something that has some data behind it and can be used to evaluate a person's weight based on their height. If you look on page 9, you need to know these categories. So less than, a BMI of less than 18.5 is considered underweight and at risk for malnutrition. So we'd like the people to be 18.5 to 24.9. That's a normal weight. If you look at Asians, they have a different number. Okay? This is based on data that's looked at. What Asians tend to carry a higher fat than the general population in the United States. They tend to carry visceral fat, which puts them at higher risk for mortality and morbidity in certain diseases. So for an Asian, the desirable is 18 to 23. For overweight in general population is 25 to 29. For Asians, it's 23 to 28. And obesity is greater than 30, or 30 or greater, you should put an underline under that. And Asians, it's 28 or more. I want you to know the general populations, I want you to appreciate that there has been one developed for Asians. As far as I know, that's the only ethnic group that they have done that for. There's not a different one for African Americans or Hispanics. So the pros, easy to measure, easy to calculate. It's not expensive. All you have to do is weigh the person and measure their height. There's standardized cutoffs. It correlates with body fat. And higher usually predicts more illness, earlier death. So the limitations I think I've gone through for it being an imperfect fat distributions, athletes, men and women. Okay. Let's go on over to page 11. So this is calculating caloric expenditure. So we're going to look first at resting energy expenditure or resting metabolic rate. They're synonymous. That is the rate, that's the amount of calories you expend if you do nothing. If you just lay down all day and do nothing, that's what it takes to keep your body going, breathing, heart, and the little cost of energy to keep the body going. Okay, so that's your base. Right? There are two equations that have been out for a long time that people use to calculate that. So one is the Harris-Benedict, it's an older, it's been around more than 100 years. And the newer one is the Mifflin-St. Jeor. So the preference is to use that Mifflin-St. Jeor because it's a little bit more accurate in healthy individuals. Use the Harris-Benedict if you're dealing with somebody who's ill or stressed. Calculate your own using both. I found mine's about 100 calories different. For me, that's a big deal because in a month, I gained another pound. So that's kind of the differences in using those. Reminders about converting kilograms to pounds to kilograms, and then height is all in centimeters. So I use 2.54, I gave you just a 2.5 inches times 2.5 to convert to centimeters. And there's all kinds of tables out there to do that as well. Next page, page 12. So I did a couple of calculations here using a 25-year-old male, 6 foot, 175 pounds, put it into the equation and came out with a resting metabolic rate of 1,905 calories. I did the same with the St. Jeor, found it to be 1,819. So the Harris-Benedict, remember, it just tends to over-calculate. And the preferred now is that Mifflin-St. Jeor. Okay, two other things to keep in mind when you're calculating your caloric needs is how active are you? This is always a hard one because people define it differently. This one gives a pretty good definition. So it looks at an activity factor. If they're confined to bed, 1 to 1.2. If they're very light, 1.3 for both sexes. You'll find females in the parentheses. So lightly active. So this may be where many of you find yourself. Most students, office workers, so people are sitting a lot. Professionals, 8 hours of sleep, 16 hours of sitting or standing. 3 hours must include light activity and 1 hour of moderate activity, tennis, dancing, walking, brisk or aerobics. Moderately active would be people with light industry, electrical, carpenter, building, farmers, soldiers, non-active service, 1.5 to 2 hours of exercise a day. Very active, full-time athletes. Michael Phelps, one time he said, you know who Michael Phelps is? Okay. So one time he said that he needed 10,000 plus calories a day. That's more than I eat in a week. I just thought one day I would like to be able to eat 10,000 calories and have no complications. 10,000, I can't even imagine it. Okay, so very active, full-time athletes, unskilled laborers, so heavy physical labor are listed, equivalent to running 9 to 13 miles a day. And then the extremely active, again, just very high level of physical activity. So you will need to figure out for you where you fall for the most part. I would look at the last month as an average. Okay. So total daily expenditure is going to be, you're going to put in you're going to figure out your resting metabolic rate, and then you're going to multiply that times your activity factor. The last 10% up there is the thermogenic effect of food and eating, process of digestion. That adds a few more calories at the end, and that gives you your estimated total daily calories. So I want you to do that. And then from your analysis of your own eating, you'll figure out, well, these are how many calories I take in, here's how many calories I estimate I need, and I'll ask you at the end, if you keep doing this for a month, do you expect that your weight will stay the same, it will go up, or it will go down? Almost everybody last year had an under, so I think that they underestimated their caloric intake, is what I think, because it was across the board. So be really good about calculating how many calories you're taking in. Questions about today? Okay, so, everybody. Everybody gets it. Okay, coming around is your 24-hour diary. note the due date is next Monday. I'm happy to have them before. When you turn it in, you will turn in this assignment that I'm giving you. Listen, 24-hour recall, your 24-hour diary, and this all come to me, okay? Names on it, it would be very helpful to have them all clipped together.